The cold wind from the English Channel howled against the limestone cliffs of Lyme Regis. The sea below churned and foamed, clawing at the rocks as if trying to tear the world apart. And somewhere along that jagged shoreline, a young girl stood motionless, her tiny frame silhouetted against the gray sky. Her name was Mary Awning, and that day she was about to uncover a secret older than humanity itself. Before we begin, tell me something. If history forgot your name, but remembered your work, would that be enough for you? Drop your answer in the comments. And if stories like this one move you, make sure to hit subscribe, because today, we're unearthing the life of a woman who dug up the past, only to be buried by it herself. The year was 1811. The world was changing fast. Machines were roaring to life across England. The Industrial Revolution was reshaping society, and war echoed across Europe. But on the storm-beaten cliffs of Dorset, none of that mattered to a 12-year-old girl with a hammer in one hand and a dream she couldn't even name in the other. Mary Awning's family was poor. Her father, Richard Awning, was a cabinet maker who supplemented his meager income by collecting curiosities. Fossils, shells, and strange stones he sold to seaside tourists. But when he died suddenly, leaving behind debt and grief, it fell on Mary and her mother to survive, and the only thing they had left were those curiosities. Every morning, Mary would set out along the dangerous cliffs, eyes sharp, hands calloused from chipping stone. Locals called her strange, odd, a girl who played with bones of monsters. But she didn't care. Something about those rocks spoke to her. Something ancient, something waiting to be seen. Then, one cold winter morning, after a heavy storm had shaken the cliffs loose, Mary noticed something protruding from the mud. At first glance, it looked like a large, smooth skull. But as she dug carefully with her hammer, it became clear this wasn't from any creature she knew. The jaws were lined with teeth sharp as needles, the eye sockets enormous, and the bones stretching far beyond what seemed possible. Days turned into weeks as Mary and her brother excavated the find, piece by piece. What emerged from the cliffside was nothing short of astonishing, the first complete skeleton of what would later be called an ichthyosaur. A creature that looked like a cross between a dolphin and a crocodile. A reptile that had lived millions of years before mankind. When word spread, scholars came from across England to see the sea monster dug up by a little girl from Lyme Regis. But while they took notes, made sketches, and argued over theories, none of them asked the simplest question: who had found it? Mary Awning's name didn't appear in the papers or scientific journals. Her discovery was credited to gentlemen scholars who bought and displayed her fossils. She was the invisible hand behind one of the greatest discoveries in natural history. But instead of bitterness, Mary felt something else: curiosity. If that creature had once ruled the seas, what else lay buried beneath her feet? What other secrets had the earth kept hidden? For Mary, the cliffs became a library. Every stone was a page, every fossil a story waiting to be read. She learned to identify layers of rock, predicting where certain fossils might be found. Without formal education, without books or guidance, she taught herself the language of the earth. Years passed. By her early 20s, Mary had become known among locals as the Fossil Lady of Lyme. Collectors, scientists, and wealthy tourists visited her small shop, where she sold ammonites, belemnites, and fish fossils displayed neatly in wooden trays. They marveled at her knowledge, but still, they didn't see her as an equal. Then, in 1823, she made another discovery that would shake science itself. While walking along the cliffs after a landslide, Mary spotted something strange, a series of bones unlike anything she'd seen before. The creature had a long neck, a tiny head, and a body shaped like a turtle's. For months, she carefully unearthed each piece, documenting it in her mind as she went. When she finally assembled the skeleton, she realized she had found something entirely new: the plesiosaur. When she unveiled it, disbelief rippled through the scientific community. Georges Cuvier, one of Europe's most respected anatomists, accused her of fakery. He claimed the fossil was a hoax, a patchwork of bones from different species. But Mary stood firm. She knew what she'd found. Eventually, even Cuvier had to admit she was right. The discovery was genuine and revolutionary. The plesiosaur was proof that the Earth had once been ruled by creatures so strange they defied imagination. But despite her triumph, recognition still eluded her. The men who studied her fossils published papers, gained titles, and earned respect while she continued to live hand-to-mouth, often pawning her finds just to pay rent. Her sharp intellect and unmatched field skills became legendary. Scientists quietly sought her advice, even if they wouldn't credit her publicly. She could read the cliffs like others read books, predicting fossil locations, identifying unknown species, and teaching trained geologists what to look for. In 1828, Mary unearthed yet another marvel, the first complete skeleton of a pterosaur, a flying reptile. To those who saw it, it was a creature out of myth, a dragon, a beast that soared through ancient skies. To Mary, it was another piece of the puzzle, evidence of a forgotten world preserved in stone. By now, her finds had begun to reshape the foundations of science. Ideas about creation, extinction, and the age of the Earth were being challenged. The fossils she unearthed told a story of life and death, of evolution and time, a story that clashed with the teachings of the Church. Yet the scientific revolution she helped ignite carried on without her name. Still, she never stopped. Even as storms eroded the cliffs and landslides destroyed her excavations, Mary went back, day after day. She climbed, dug, and searched, not for fame, but for understanding. But the years of harsh work took their toll. Her hands trembled, her back ached, and exhaustion followed her home each night. Yet, even as her health began to fail, she pressed on, because discovery, to her, was not a choice. It was a calling. And though the world didn't know it yet, the woman scraping fossils from the cliffs of Lyme was quietly rewriting the story of life itself. The waves crashed harder that year, like the sea itself was warning her. The storms grew stronger, the cliffs steeper, and yet Mary Anning refused to stop. The fossils called to her, silent ancient voices buried in the rock, and she couldn't turn away. By 1830, she was no longer just the fossil lady of Lyme, among collectors and scientists. Her reputation had grown into legend. Men who wrote textbooks came to her shop for advice. Wealthy geologists paid visits just to watch her work, studying her methods like apprentices. She could identify an extinct animal from a single bone fragment, something no professor could do with a library full of books. And yet, she remained an outsider. While scholars in London debated the meaning of her finds in grand lecture halls, Mary worked in the cold and wind, her clothes soaked with salt and mud. They quoted her observations in their journals without ever mentioning her name. The Geological Society of London, founded to honor scientific minds, didn't even allow women through its doors. But if they thought they could bury her story, they didn't understand who she was, because Mary Anning had something far stronger than recognition. She had obsession. That year, a series of landslides tore through the cliffs of Lyme Regis, destroying her home and nearly killing her dog, Trey, her only constant companion. Locals told her it was a sign from God to stop. But Mary returned the next morning, hammer in hand, eyes fixed on the rocks as if she were arguing with the earth itself. And there, in the aftermath of destruction, she found another miracle. Buried deep in the newly exposed rock was a fossil unlike any she had seen before. It was large, sleek, and perfectly preserved, another ichthyosaur, but far more complete. Every bone in its long, coiled tail was intact, every tooth sharp and untouched by time. She spent months uncovering it, inch by inch, until it emerged in its entirety, a prehistoric predator frozen in stone. When it was displayed in London, scholars called it one of the most important finds in Britain's scientific history. But again, Mary's name was nowhere to be found. The fossil bore the label, from the collection of Lord Henley. That's how her life went. Discovery after discovery, each one stolen in plain sight. But word of her brilliance couldn't stay hidden forever. Travelers wrote about her in letters and diaries. Scientists quietly acknowledged her expertise in private, and soon the whispers grew into something undeniable. By the mid-1830s, Mary Anning was known not just as a collector, but as the greatest fossil hunter in Britain. Still, fame didn't pay the bills. The tourists who once bought her ammonites now haggled her prices down. The wealthy collectors who praised her in letters rarely paid her fairly. Poverty clung to her like a shadow. Yet, her mind never stopped working. She began to ask questions, dangerous questions. Why were there so many extinct animals buried beneath the earth? Why did entire species vanish from the fossil record? And what did it mean about the world's creation? Her discoveries hinted at something bigger, a truth that would soon shake religion, philosophy, and science itself. Because her fossils told a story of a planet that had lived and died many times over. A planet far older than the Bible suggested. A planet where extinction wasn't an accident, it was nature's law. These ideas were blasphemous at the time. The church called them heresy. Yet quietly, her fossils became the proof that inspired generations of scientists, including a young Charles Darwin, who would later publish The Origin of Species. But Mary would never live to see that. While others used her work to build theories and careers, she was still fighting to survive. In 1835, tragedy struck again when she fell seriously ill after another landslide. The same cliffs that had given her everything had nearly taken her life. Her friend, the geologist Henry de la Becche, one of the few men who truly respected her, decided to act. He painted a grand watercolor titled Duria Antiquae, a vision of prehistoric life filled with creatures Mary had discovered. He sold prints of it across Britain, using the money to support her. It was a rare kindness in a life filled with struggle, but it couldn't change what society refused to see. Women like Mary weren't allowed to be scientists, not because they lacked intelligence, but because they lacked titles. Knowledge in that era belonged to men with degrees, not women with hammers. And yet, when those same men debated the age of the earth or the origins of species, they were standing on the bones she had unearthed. In 1837, Mary made one of her most extraordinary finds. The remains of a large fish-like reptile with an embryo still inside it. It was the first fossil evidence showing that ichthyosaurs gave birth to live young. It was another blow to the old belief that reptiles always laid eggs, and another leap forward in understanding ancient life. Still, she published nothing. Not because she didn't want to, but because she couldn't. The Geological Society barred women from presenting papers or even attending meetings. Every word she discovered had to pass through someone else's mouth before the world could hear it. Imagine that, discovering creatures no one had ever seen. Rewriting the history of life itself, yet never being allowed to sign your own name beneath your work. But Mary never raged against it, not publicly. She worked quietly, humbly, tirelessly, driven not by fame, but by fascination. In her small shop by the sea, surrounded by fossils and sketches, she'd sit by candlelight examining fragments of bone, matching them in her mind like pieces of a puzzle. Visitors described her as soft-spoken, but sharp as steel. A woman who could explain anatomy better than most doctors, who could see through rock and time with uncanny precision. And despite her struggles, there were moments, brief, fleeting, when she glimpsed the recognition she deserved. Letters arrived from geologists across Europe seeking her opinion on new finds. Even scientists from the British Museum began consulting her on fossil classifications. But recognition without respect is just another kind of theft. And deep down, Mary knew the truth. The world would celebrate her discoveries, but never her name. Still, she pressed on. Every fossil she uncovered chipped away at the boundaries of science, each one a whisper of evolution before evolution had a name. By the early 1840s, her health began to fail. The long years of exposure to the cold, the damp, the endless climbs up the cliffs, they had left their mark. She began to feel constant pain, weakness, and fatigue. The diagnosis was grim: breast cancer. Treatment in those days was brutal and often futile. But Mary didn't retreat. She continued to work as long as her body allowed. Even as her strength faded, she still walked the beaches of Lyme, hammer in hand, eyes scanning the cliffs as if afraid she might miss one last discovery. And then, one evening, she found herself standing alone at the edge of the sea, the same spot where, as a child, she had uncovered her first fossil. The tide was high, the wind sharp, and the sky burning red with the last light of day. She looked out over the waves and whispered something that only the sea could hear, because she knew her time was ending. But the cliffs, they would remember her. The stones she cracked open would tell her story long after she was gone. Mary Onning didn't just uncover bones, she uncovered time itself. And though her name was fading, her legacy was only beginning. The sea was calm that morning, unnervingly calm. The cliffs stood silent, the waves soft against the pebbles. Lyme Regis seemed frozen in time, as if the world itself had paused to honor her. By 1846, Mary Onning could barely walk. The cancer had spread through her body, draining the life from her limbs, yet she still refused to give up her daily ritual. One slow walk along the beach, past the fossils she had uncovered, past the rocks that had become her life's canvas. She moved slowly, but with purpose, as if each step carried the weight of memory, each stone a story only she could read. The people of Lyme watched her with quiet reverence now. Once, they had called her that fossil woman, half in jest, half in suspicion. Now, they lowered their voices when she passed, unsure how to speak about someone who had seen into the bones of the world. Her small fossil shop, once her only lifeline, had become something else entirely, a museum before museums existed. Cabinets lined with ammonites, vertebrae, and skulls. Shelves covered in labeled specimens. Sketches carefully drawn by hand, each a testament to decades of discovery. Tourists and scientists alike would stop by, but this time, they didn't come to buy. They came to pay respects. Still, there were nights when she sat by the candlelight, reading old letters. The ones she had never answered, from men who had published her ideas as their own. Letters that began with "My dear Miss Anning" and ended with, "Your insights were most useful to my recent paper." They never said thank you. They never said you discovered this. They only said useful. Mary never replied to any of them. By the spring of 1847, her condition worsened. Pain kept her awake most nights, and even her faithful walks became impossible. Friends brought her food and medicine. Local children left flowers at her door. And on a quiet morning that summer, as the tide crept over the shore, Mary Anning, the greatest fossil hunter the world had never properly known, took her final breath. She was 47 years old. Her passing barely made the newspapers. No headlines, no grand obituary, just a brief note in a geological journal acknowledging her contributions, unsigned, as always. But in Lyme Regis, something remarkable happened. The local church held a public service in her honor. The first time the Geological Society of London ever officially recognized a woman. Members traveled from across England to attend. They spoke of her intelligence, her perseverance, her discoveries, all the things they had ignored while she lived. And though the society didn't allow women as members until 1904, nearly 60 years later, they made a rare exception that day. They paid for her tombstone, engraving words that would echo through time. "She has earned a name in the annals of science." It was a simple line, but it meant everything. Because Mary Onning's story didn't end with her death, it began there. Years later, a quiet revolution began to ripple through the world of science. Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species, shaking the foundations of religion and human understanding. Fossils, once seen as curiosities, became the very proof of evolution. And in every bone, every ancient skull, every skeleton studied by the next generation, Mary's shadow lingered. Her ichthyosaurs, her plesiosaurs, her ammonites, her legacy finally visible. Even scientists who had once dismissed her began to quote her notes, her sketches, her observations, realizing they had built their theories upon the bedrock of her brilliance. By the late 19th century, Mary Anning had transformed from a forgotten fossil hunter to a symbol, the face of uncredited genius, of women who changed history while history tried to erase them. In time, she became a figure of myth and inspiration. Children's books were written about her. Streets were named after her. Museums dedicated entire halls to her discoveries. Even the Royal Society, once closed to women, listed her among the 10 most influential British women in science. It took a century and a half, but the world finally caught up to the truth she had known all along. That knowledge belongs to those who seek it, not to those who are allowed to speak it. Still, there's something haunting about Mary's legacy. She never published a paper, never stood behind a podium, never received a medal. Yet, she changed science forever. And maybe that's the greatest irony, that the person who revealed Earth's deepest past was buried in silence for so long. But the cliffs of Lyme Regis still whisper her name when the tide rises. Every fossil washed ashore feels like a fragment of her memory, the world's quiet apology for forgetting her. Because in every fossil hunter today, in every young scientist defying odds, in every woman breaking into fields once forbidden, there's a trace of Mary Anning. She never asked for glory. She only asked to be seen. And now, finally, she is. They say time buries everything, but sometimes the earth hides things not to erase them, but to protect them until we're ready to understand. Mary Anning wasn't waiting for fame. She was waiting for us to finally see her not as a curiosity, but as a pioneer. So the next time you walk along a beach or pick up a stone, remember, somewhere beneath your feet might lie the story of another forgotten genius, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover it. Because history doesn't just belong to those who write it. It belongs to those who dig for it. And if you believe stories like Mary's deserve to be unearthed, subscribe to the channel, press the bell icon, and join us as we uncover more forgotten scientists whose discoveries changed the world, even if the world forgot them.